Today we're talking homographs. What the heck are homographs? Well, there are a couple of ways to describe homographs. First, homographs are words that look the same and sound the same, but have different meanings, like bat or bat. Homographs can also be described as words that look the same, but sound differently and have different meanings, like bow or bow. Yes, English is hard, but don't worry about what homographs are called or their definitions. Just know that they exist in English as they do in many other languages, and keep your eyes peeled for them. So we're going to do an activity to practice with pronunciation. I speak and then you repeat. I'll start by saying the sentence and then the homographs. Just listen to these. Then I'm going to repeat each sentence a few times at different speeds with spaces between the words for you to practice. Your job is to listen and to practice your pronunciation, so repeat after me. You'll have plenty of time to practice, but if it's not enough for you, no worries. Just stop the video and rewind. Please don't just listen. Repeat after me. This is your chance to wrap your mouth around some English. So are you ready? Ready? Okay, let's go. Number 1. Okay, just listen. The bandage was wound around the wound. Wound, 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 wound. You see, they're spelled the same, but the sounds are different. So OU can sound like ow, wound, or oo, wound. Wound, 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 wound. Okay, now listen for me to stop speaking and then repeat after me. The bandage was wound around the wound. 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 Number 2. The farm was used to produce produce. Produce, produce. Produce, produce. So you might notice it ends with an S sound. Both of them. Produce, produce. What's the difference in these words? It's the accent on the syllables. The first one, produce, produce, has the accent on the second syllable. Produce, produce. The second one has the accent on the first syllable. Produce, produce. Can you hear that? It's on the first syllable. Produce, produce. So compare them again. Produce, produce. Produce, produce. Now repeat after me. The farm was used to produce produce. 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 Number 3. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. Refuse, refuse. Refuse, refuse. So there are a couple of differences here in these words. The first is the accent on the syllables. So in the first word, refuse, where's that accent? Which syllable? Refuse, refuse. It's on the second syllable, refuse. And the second word, refuse, refuse. So the stress is on the first syllable for that word, refuse. So listen to both of them again. Refuse, refuse. Refuse, refuse. Do you hear another difference? Refuse, refuse. Refuse, refuse. Maybe you can tell that in the first one, refuse, the sound at the end is almost like a Z. Z, refuse. Whereas the second word, refuse, refuse, ends with an S sound. So I'm going to say them again. Refuse, 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 refuse. Okay, so now repeat. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. The dump was so full it had to refuse more refuse. That's it. Congratulations, your work is done. For now. Watch this again and keep on practicing. If you have any questions, please post them below this video and I'll answer them right away. If you have any comments, I'd love to hear those too. If you like this video, please click on the thumbs up below and subscribe to our channel. There will be plenty more coming from all of us at Easter Seals Oregon Connecting Communities just for you. See you later, alligator.